Thank you for tuning in to the Revolution of Man podcast. I'm your host, Lance Cashion. This podcast is an extension of my blog at revolutionofman.org. So you can go there and check out previous episodes. You can also read a few things that I've written, and I've got some other resources there at revolutionofman.org. I'm also the founder and CEO of the Forge Room Foundation. We're based here in Fort Worth. We equip and activate and connect the local church here in Fort Worth to reshape the culture and make a difference for Christ in our city. You can go to forgeroom.org to learn more about that. We're also having an end-of-year campaign to raise $100,000 to expand our capabilities in 2025. It's called Forged for the City. We'd love you to partner with us, come alongside, and join us in our mission of shaping the culture and making a difference in our community for Christ. Today's episode, I'm going to be joined by my friend Tyler Durham, and we'll cover a bunch of topics. Both of us serve as elders at King's Cross Fellowship here in Fort Worth, and you can go to kingscrossfellowship.com to learn more about our church. We meet at 5 p.m. on Sunday evenings. So if you're looking for a church, stop by and visit us. We'd love to see you. So without further ado, we'll jump into the episode. Thank you, and don't forget to share, comment, and like.
Okay, so last week you went to,
An event.
what was it, the America First Policy Institute event in Fort Worth?
Like a meeting to talk about the transition team for President Trump and the people that are involved in it and his picks for cabinet and what that transition is going to look like.
How do you feel about the transition as of right now?
I think it looks great. It's just, it's a lot. We're talking about 4,000 people being replaced right off the bat.
You remember years ago at our church?
There's a couple hundred executive orders that are ready to go, and they're thinking day one, there could be 100 signed.
Yeah.
Immediately. I think that was the number, was 100 on day one. Which is
today's Wednesday. I don't know when you're going to put this out online, but I just saw that Peter Navarro has been appointed, I think, like senior counselor for trade and manufacturing or something like that, and he's a fire breather.
He is,
and he's been in prison as a political prisoner, essentially. Yeah,
he's persecuted for his political beliefs. He's a political prisoner.
Yeah, and so he's motivated. Let's just put it that way.
He's motivated, and I think he's the one that structured all of our foreign trade deals when Trump was.
He's essentially one of the key guys around our booming economy in 2018 and 2019.
Yeah,
and he's back in town.
Right,
back in the saddle.
I think the most interesting thing that stuck out, or the thing that's most interesting with this whole transition team right now is their attack on DEI. And I think
what does that mean? Tell your
audience. Well,
what is DEI?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or what I call it, DEI, destroy every institution.
Yeah.
It's cultural Marxism or critical social theory applied within the institutions. So diversity, equity, inclusion, that means those words don't mean what you think they do. It's basically
very Orwellian.
Socialism into the institutions. It's critical theory applied inside the institutions, the long march through the institutions, to use Rudy Deutsch.
How did it become such a dominant, how did its tentacles get into every institution in our country, down from preschool to all the way up to the military?
It's came through the academies, the higher education. It got pushed down through the education. So if you're educating generations of students to believe in this woke ideology, which is this oppressor-oppressed ideology, zero-sum game, then DEI is an expression of that. And
it's the fruit of that indoctrination.
It's It's exactly. It is the implementation of that. So it's theory that's turned into praxis, or you take the idea and then you actually implement the idea and start activating on it. So you can have an idea. When that idea gets implemented, that's the praxis.
And I would argue a lot of students, they're 18, 19, 20 years old. They don't even know that they're being hammered with this stuff. Like when I used to do the young adult residency at my previous church, there were a lot of post-college graduates that were in like education department, getting a degree in education, cultural studies, all kinds of kind of woke areas in higher education. And I asked them, hey, did you ever come across these ideas? And a lot of them were like, no. But then the way they understood reality, they clearly had been shaped by some of these ideas. They didn't even know it.
No, it's the waters that they swim. It's the air that they breathe.
Because you're really not, let's just be real, a 19-year-old, a freshman, a sophomore, they're not paying attention.
They're not thinking critically.
They're not thinking critically.
They're being told what to think rather than how to think. So they don't have that critical thinking, or they're not using logic and reason. That's kind of the defense against those ideas is like, wait a second, what is that? What do you mean by that? Is that true? Okay,
yeah, this is a perfect segue into a book I've started reading called Jesus and Marx, From Gospel to Ideology, written by a French public intellectual. He's a Christian, but it's hard to even know how to label this guy. Some of the best writers, some of the writers that I enjoy reading the most are the ones that are the hardest to really pin down. They're original thinkers in a lot of ways. But his name is Jacques Ellul, and this was written in, let's see here, where's the date on this? 1988. Mm-hmm. So 1988, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but it made me think of this particular section here on the importance of presuppositions. Mm-hmm. And so talking about students that really don't even know they're being...
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so they're foundational beliefs that are just assumed. They're the building blocks for, building your philosophy, building your theology. They're the starting point ideas. They're for example, do you believe in a personal God? Mm-hmm. Well, if you do, that's a presupposition that then causes you to see certain things a different way than somebody who starts with non-belief in God.
Or objective truth. Do you believe in objective truth? Or
objective truth, yeah. Okay. If you don't believe that objective truth is even possible to attain, then that's going to shape a lot of your views on morality and ethics. And
it's going to shape your life.
Okay,
so go ahead.
Yeah, so he's talking about how so many Christians that have been influenced by Marxism have assumed so much, mm-hmm. and they've allowed these presuppositions to go unchecked.
Right.
And oftentimes they don't even know they're doing it, like these college students. But here's what he says. This is in a footnote. He says, the brief analysis of uncritically assumed presuppositions. So these are foundational beliefs that you just assume are true.
That you've never really thought
deeply about. Okay. It's just kind of lying
rather
subconsciously.
Than saying, hey, I believe this. Why do I believe that?
Right.
Okay, yeah.
So these are uncritically assumed presuppositions, never explicitly expressed. Seems to me essential if we're to understand and situate, and he's talking about a certain Christian thinker who became a Marxist, mm-hmm. his particular work. In the course of this book, the book written by this gentleman who was a Christian Marxist, which you can't be one, but he was attempting to. He said, in the course of this book, I will return to this issue several times. The presuppositions of a text matter more, I believe, than what it says. Mm-hmm. The presuppositions of a text or a speech or a YouTube video or a podcast matter more, I believe, than what it says. They come to light when we ask the question, what basis does this statement or position have? Mm-hmm. After we have eliminated a certain number of secondary matters, we find ourselves left with a hard, irreducible kernel which we soon recognize as unconscious in the author's thinking. Therefore, he has not expressed, let alone criticized, these axioms that seem evident to him. Often we can detect presuppositions by looking for themes that should logically enter into the whole, but which the author never mentions or deals with methodically. He considers them givens, and this fact reveals the true meaning of his work, much more so than the matters he affirms. And here's a great example. That police, back with the whole BLM riots and things in 2020, the summer of 2020, the summer of love is what they call it. The presupposition was that policemen across the country, police forces, discriminated against minority groups in terms of their engagement with physical interactions with criminals, with shootings by police. It was just a given that it happened more with minorities than with white people. You remember that?
Yeah. The point where there were people out there literally saying that defund the police, and that police officers were hunting black people.
Yeah, LeBron James said that we're not safe to go in the streets because they're hunting black people. But and you can look this up now, but the facts are the opposite.
Right. That statistics don't bear that out. And there was a Harvard professor, I forgot his name right now, a black professor that did a study on that you can probably track down. But my point is that was the starting point for so many Christians. Of course this is true. Well, have you looked at any statistics? No.
Right.
Do
you have any basis for this belief? No, not at all. Well, then why are you so certain that this is a fact? Well, it just is. And if you critique it, then you're a racist. You know? And so with back to DEI, there's so many things wrapped up in diversity, equity, and inclusion that are presuppositions that have not even been challenged by a large percentage of our country. So, for example, with equity, what is equity?
Right. Well, here's let me start with a quote.
Okay.
So this is what I wrote about DEI, kind of putting things in my own words in a piece I wrote called DEI's Destruction of Every Institution, a Counter-Revolution in the Making. Critical theory and all of its expressions are battling for dominance as the new American cultural reality. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is cultural Marxism, critical theory applied to institutions, businesses, NGOs, governing institutions, and other mediating institutions that appropriate DEI practices. It will eventually fail. DEI replaces organizational relationships based on wisdom, knowledge, and ability with identity politics based on ethnicity, sex, identity, things like that, along with intersectional lines of oppression. So there's your oppressor-oppressed dynamic with Marxism. In other words, forces within our culture have placed political identity at the center of the human universe. Critical theorists are adept at identifying social wedges in a society that can be used to divide people, turning them against each other. Tribalism. Envy, emotion, and tribalism fuel identity politics and DEI. So that's what DEI is. They're ways of finding wedges between people. You're of one ethnicity, I'm of another. There's some type of oppressor-oppressed dynamic.
Yeah.
And that happens institutions. So it's built into the worldview, and it goes in institutionally into all these institutions because people are being trained in the institutions, higher education, colleges, universities, down to high school now, elementary kids with critical theory, critical race theory, and it gets pushed out through all the institutions. So what we're seeing is the breakdown of these institutions because of DEI. That's the consequence. That's the fruit of the DEI, which is the branch, comes from the root of critical theory, which is cultural Marxism. And so it's made to destroy the institution. So if you implement DEI, it may sound good. Well, we want diversity, we want inclusion, we want equity, we want equal, playing field for everyone. That's different than equal outcomes, where you flatten. It's like the Gaussian bell curve applied to humanity, and you take all the outliers and you throw them out. So someone who's maybe mentally handicapped or disabled and Steve Jobs are not in the group. Because they're not in the bell curve. So it flattens everything, and everything is pushed to the middle. But there's these divisions among all the different ethnicities, sexes, men and women, trans, homosexuals, straight people, blacks, whites, Asians, you name it. That intersectional wedge gets pushed in, and then it destroys the institution. And I think that, and back to like what you're talking about, it's the presuppositions, the roots, the beliefs that drive something like DEI. When you start to see that, back to Trump's transition team, and that you're seeing that, the phrase "go woke, go broke." Well, it's true. Well, it's going to destroy your business if you implement DEI. It's made to destroy it. It's Marxism. My concern is that we focus on the fruit in the branches of DEI, but you don't understand what's at the root of it, which, well, okay, it's Marxism, atheism, materialism. No, it's actually occultism.
Well, pause on that for a second. So let's connect that to what the presuppositions. So
that's what I call it, the belief, the underlying subconscious beliefs.
Right. So with diversity, what is the assumption that people are believing with diversity? And like the way he describes it is the question to ask: what basis does this statement or position have? So, what basis does this position on diversity have? I think the working assumption that people have with diversity is that the only diversity that matters is diversity of color, or diversity of oppressed, oppressor. It's just more people from the oppressed group. That's what makes a university diverse, for example.
Right.
But why is it that they don't, real quick, why is it that they don't count intellectual diversity or political diversity? Our higher education there is zero diversity among faculty when it comes to their political positions. They're all left wing, for the most part, vast majority of them. And then also when it comes to intellectual thought, it is one of the most dogmatic places you can find is your typical university.
Right.
There is no freedom of thought and expression. And so why is it, what are their assumptions that say the only diversity that matters is diversity with these particular groups?
Yeah.
That's the question to ask.
Yeah.
And where did that come from, that the only thing that matters with diversity is diversity of skin color, diversity of
sexual orientation?
And so I think that's the part that so many people just kind of subtly conform to this social idea without critiquing it and saying, well, wait a minute, you talk all this about diversity, and yet there's zero diversity of thought at an academic institution. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that tends to get missed by a lot of people is that you're dealing with a linguistic issue at the core of its language, is that the words are being redefined. So when as Christians, we talk about diversity versus someone that's in the DEI realm talks about diversity, those words mean different things. Just like justice would mean two different things. If someone comes from a critical social theory background and they start talking about justice versus you and I talking as Christians talking about biblical justice, they're two different things. Same words, two different dictionaries. When I talk about biblical justice, I'm talking about God's justice, that God is just and that man should walk justly, meaning that to the best of our ability, God help us that when something's wrong, we bring order to that disorder. Make things right as best we can, knowing there won't be full justice in this world until Jesus comes back. When someone that buys into the critical social theory justice, that's socialism. I mean, that's just another word for socialism. So the linguistics part of it, going back to words, are very important. You know, God is a God that speaks. He's a God that speaks. So twisting his words, twisting any words and making them mean things that they don't actually mean is evil. So when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, most Christians would say, hey, I think that's a good thing. We want those things, but you're not understanding what is meant by those words. Those are politically charged words, not politically charged words, they're politically structured words. That means when you say them and implement them in praxis, then they change the dynamic in a social system or in a relationship. So what's the difference
between equity and equality?
A huge difference. So equality means that you have, is the best of your ability, equal opportunity. Like in America, it's equal opportunity. You may be born poor, very poor, and somebody may be born very wealthy, but there's an opportunity if you work hard and study hard and, you know, do the right things in life, you could actually become wealthy in America. You can. That doesn't make, there's no guarantee. So it's
possible.
It's possible means that there's an equal. There's opportunities are equal to the, not perfectly equal, but then
equity.
As a
society, we want to remove any barriers that would prevent someone from having an equal opportunity to pursue this or pursue that, and you know, we're not manipulating and socially engineering. We're just trying to remove barriers so that if somebody wants to go down this path, there's nothing that's blocking them from pursuing that path.
And equity in the way of not biblical equity, but equity in the way of the critical social theory, DEI equity, is equal outcomes. That means that it doesn't matter, equal outcomes. Whether you're wealthy, you're smart, or you're not smart, whether you've earned the merit and earned your way to become a fighter pilot in the Navy, or you haven't. It's kind of like it's an equity of outcome. That's why you have this diminishing of the quality of
meritocracy is now criticized. It's like, oh, we should lower the standards because
it's seen as white supremacist.
Yeah.
So that you see that's you know, invisible white supremacy. It's like, no, it's actually reality. And people are like, well, no, if you look at statistically, minorities are at a lower rate of education. I'm like, which minorities? Yeah. And look at, you could take somebody, again, back to outliers in the Gaussian bell curve. Look at somebody like Dr. Ben Carson. Grew up in absolute poverty. His mother was illiterate, single mom. Yeah, I think he had 2 brothers. Went to raising up these children, becomes the premier pediatric brain surgeon in the world, and runs for president. You could take somebody from the left. Barack Obama ran for president, won twice. You know, he's worth over $100 million. So
problems with that, but
I'm just saying, just statistically, I'm not, you know, but the idea is that the conditions in the United States are such that we have equality.
So let's take like an engineering degree, for example. In terms of equality, what we would want to do is make sure that there's not barriers that are unintentionally or intentionally put up that prevents females from pursuing an engineering degree.
Right.
If they meet the standards, if they apply themselves, then they should be able to get an engineering degree. Right. Let's not put any barriers up. They need an equal opportunity to pursue.
It doesn't matter whether you're male, female. Like there has to be some type of barrier. Like you have to be 18 or something, you know,
equity,
or whatever.
So equity would say we need to manipulate the engineering department because we have a quota, a goal to have 50% of the students female and 50% male.
So there's your diversity quota.
Yeah. So
they all play in. So they're all linked together.
Yeah. So whether you and you know what ends up getting lost in that is whether, you know, women want to pursue an engineering degree or not. Like if you create a social quota, then that's where propaganda comes in, and you start manipulating more women to enter the program.
Right.
You start doing things to try to, when maybe there's a reason why there's more men in engineering departments than women.
Right.
Maybe there's a reason behind that besides discrimination. Who knows? Yeah. But the point is, when you start tinkering with outcomes and you start manipulating outcomes, that's where you start to really see some dark things.
Well, you start to see
come to the forefront.
Ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have victims. Equity, equal outcomes. That is when you start to have products that are dangerous, and you put people in situations that they're not qualified to be in. That's when you start lowering your standards, changing the standards to allow people into areas of work and vocation.
Like Boeing, pilot. I want my pilot. I don't care what color they are. I don't care what country they're from. I don't care. I want the best pilot.
Right. To fly
me and my family wherever we want to go. And I don't think anybody cares. Mm-hmm. As long as they know that this pilot went through a legitimate certification training. And there was no lowering of the bar, or a brain surgeon, Dr. Ben Carson was one of the best, if not the best brain surgeon at one point in time in the country. Give me him all day and night. People don't care. And that goes back to the presuppositions. It's these underlying things that people believe without critiquing that starts to lead them down these paths where it's like, how could you possibly...
It leads you to absurdity.
Absurdity, yeah.
It leads you to absurdity, because then you start to think, then when the world becomes absurd, you don't notice it, or you kind of buy into it. You know that it's absurd. That's Riley Gaines said that last night. She was like, everything's become, it's just absurd.
Yeah.
Like, think about it. Absurd. And what was really interesting about the whole diversity, equity, inclusion thing is she was the swimmer in Kentucky, one of the fastest women in the 200 free on the planet, like extremely fast. And that's when William Thomas entered the picture from UPenn.
And she tied the dude. And here's the deal. He was not even a mediocre swimmer on the men's team. And then he decimates and dominates. He decimates the women, dominates the women's team, the women's sport of swimming. She tied him. That tells you how fast she is. Didn't they put him on the first place podium, and they didn't share
There's
the
a
first
whole
place?
story that she shared behind that, which is basically they didn't have enough. They had
medals.
Awards for a first place, second place, third place. They didn't have two, so they had one, but they couldn't share it. So they gave her the ability. No, they gave Riley,
Gaines,
the trophy to take a picture with it, whatever. But they forced her to give it to William Thomas.
Bill Thomas.
Billy Thomas. And here's the thing.
That's unbelievable.
That's having a daughter that's in ballet and in sports, and you've got three daughters, and you have a wife that was
coaches
volleyball and played volleyball, and having been a swimmer, it's like all of these things. My brain, she's sitting there explaining this stuff.
It's a hill to die on.
And I was irate in this. I was like, I can't believe it. What really set me off, and I didn't realize this had happened, is she shared the story that she was they're in the locker room getting ready to race, and it's the women's locker room, and they're getting dressed, and obviously it's an intimate area. It's like men's locker. It's like you don't have clothes on in the locker room, particularly swimming. So you're getting
off
ready.
Limits to the other sex.
She was getting ready to swim, putting on her suit, and
Bill walks in.
The place went silent. She described it. She was like, the locker room is usually chatting, going, imagine a women's locker room. I've never been in one, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty chatty.
I live with 4 women, so I can tell you.
So you live in a women's locker room, kind of.
That's why I've taken up hunting.
Yeah, yes. We need to talk about that in another podcast. But she said that she had her back turned, and she was in her locker, I guess, and it went silent. And she turned around, and there's a 6'4" man standing right next to her. That's complete. He hasn't had any surgeries. It's a dude, and he's putting on his.
And you're talking about Bill Thomas.
Bill Thomas.
Okay.
Leah, Billy Thomas, and she was just shocked, and just in complete shock. And I didn't know that part of the story, and she went on about it. But I was like,
horrifying.
If my daughter was in a locker room and a dude came in there, I don't care if he thinks he's Yoda, and he gets undressed. Of all the characters, you go with Yoda. Yoda.
What is he going to lift up the women?
I don't know. Yoda. I just thought it was funny. So, but a female Yoda, and so, but think about your daughter in a 6 foot. It doesn't matter how tall. A dude walks in there, starts getting undressed in their locker room. I would be irate. Like I'd want to hurt somebody.
Where are all the journalists? And this goes back to once again, it goes back to what Alol was saying with the precept. They have been co-opted. The social conformity has been so strong that they're unable to see what is so clear to the vast majority of Americans. And you look at and that's one of the reasons I think Trump won, is you look at the numbers in the polls, it's like overwhelmingly, I think over 70% of Americans are like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. It's absurd.
Men should not be in women's sports, in women's bathrooms, in women's locker rooms. Duh. I mean, and a lot of people woke up to that.
Yeah.
But last thing with the inclusion, real quick, what's the inclusion part of DEI?
So that's where the inclusion is, where you have the intersectional, which is intersectionality, where all the oppressed, all your areas of oppression. So if you're a minority, lesbian, feminist, you put the levels of oppression disabled, like you've got all these areas of where you're a victim of oppression, that gives you a moral high ground above people that are not oppressed. So as a heterosexual white Christian male, you have no oppression. You are the oppressor.
You have no voice in society.
So
no
you don't have
moral authority
any
for anything.
moral authority whatsoever. You're actually evil.
Yeah.
So the more levels of intersectional levels of victim status that someone can stack up, essentially,
the higher level of social moral authority you have.
Voice.
Yeah.
You have to listen.
Yeah.
Tyler, you have to just listen and learn. You remember the listen and learn? I got sick of hearing that. So
did you watch the Matt Walsh movie?
No, I haven't.
It's hilarious.
I've heard that.
But laugh out loud. No. Hold on. No, you don't want to talk about Am I Racist?
I'm going to go. No, I'm not. What did you ask me? You asked me a question.
I don't know.
I'll think of it. I'm going to apologize.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't remember. So Matt Walsh.
You're talking about Bill. You were talking about Bill. Bill in the locker room. Bill Thomas in the locker room. And you were talking about
inclusion. You asked about inclusion. So inclusion is including all of those oppressed voices within the dynamic, which you've now driven a wedge. The diversity, forcing the diversity, equity, forcing equal outcomes, and now you're gonna the inclusion that all of them have a voice, and that some, if you are an oppressor in that oppressor group, you don't have a voice. Mm-hmm. So it creates all of these
the listen
wedges.
And learn. That's what made me think of the Am I Racist?
Yeah. So go ahead. Am I Racist?
No, that's it.
Oh, okay.
That's it. Yeah, it was go see the movie. It's good. Yeah, you need to see it. So all those things are kind of intertwined, and the reason William Thomas or whatever you want to call him,
Willie Thomas.
Willie. But the reason you can't exclude him from the locker room is because we're all about inclusion.
Right.
And so you've just discriminated. You're a bigot if you want to keep this transgender person out of the locker room. That's not very inclusive, is it? And all these things go together. And full circle back to my, I think, question I had at the beginning of that event you went to last week. Mm-hmm. Do you think that they're on the right track with? You had mentioned that one of the topics was DEI.
Yeah.
And do you think they have a good understanding of DEI and that they're going the right direction? And with these cabinet picks y'all had talked about, like,
I think that my concern is that they don't fully understand that they see DEI as a program that's been implemented and not the that it is the implementation of a bona fide worldview, meaning that it's coming out of critical social theory, critical theory. So it's Marxism.
How would that change How would that change the action, whether you think it's just a program or a worldview?
So it's kind of like weeds in your yard. Mm-hmm. So if you ever deal with weeds in your yard, you can mow over the weeds. What happens within a week? Like you mow your grass in your yard, the weeds actually grow back faster than the grass does.
Or pull out some weeds, but leave 90% of them still in there.
Let's talk about just mowing them. So you're just cut off the tops of the weeds. The weeds grow back. Mm-hmm. If you don't want weeds in your yard, what do you have to do? You have to kill them at the root. You either have to, hit them with some type of herbicide, or you have to pull the weed up and get the entire root out. Otherwise, the weed comes back up. My concern is that they see the tops of the weeds because they're seeing the fruit, the consequences of DEI, and they understand, okay, this is where this stuff is. We know how to, it's in these institutions. It's creating havoc. Mm-hmm. All these DEI people, they need to go. Okay, that is one part of a solution, but the core of the issue is at the worldview presuppositional level of the people that believe that is the way to go. So it's actually my concern is that they'll understand at the very core, the root of this is a belief system, a worldview system that these people that are implementing DEI, they believe it. It's a part of a religion. Mm-hmm. It's like telling a Christian, don't go serve the poor, or don't something that a Christian should be known to do is like help those who are less fortunate. Just as something as a Christian witness, just like, yeah, that's a Christian witness. We help people. If somebody said don't do that, you know what I'm saying? So my point is that we need to pay attention. Yes, deal with the fruit and the branches of DEI.
So it's a both and.
Yeah, but don't forget that the hard work is going to getting at the root. That is institutional. Like you set, if Trump was to set up a multi-decade type of institution to say, how do we help reshape the American worldview? I think this is where the church comes in. This is like the huge opportunity of the church. If you don't want DEI and planes falling out of the sky, then maybe you should start paying attention as a pastor, preaching the gospel and teaching about worldview and these presuppositions so that when kids go to college or they come in contact with some of these ideas, they're thinking critically. They're like, that doesn't align with reality. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of that's my concern, because underneath the critical social theory, critical theory that leads to DEI and the consequences that you see is most Christians believe our presupposition that Marxists are atheists. They're not. The true Marxist communists are not atheists. It's driven by the occult, kind of like the book Devil and Karl Marx. I don't know if that book that you just read that quote from gets into the spiritual dimensions of Marx and what's driving this. It's the occult. Mm-hmm. And that has to be dealt with. And that's the church. That's our specialty.
But let me just, the reason to be both and is because let's just take just flat out like the Church of Satan. Mm-hmm. Like, we want to root out that ideology at the core. We don't want anybody to fall prey to that ideology. But in the meantime, we can work to keep it out of certain places locally. Yeah. You know, we act locally, think globally is what I've heard a lot of people say.
Sure.
So acting locally means, hey, I might not be able to root out this idea that's been around forever, but I can at least make it really hard for it to gain traction in my community. Mm-hmm. And so I think the difficulty at rooting out things at a worldview level is, I mean, that's almost that's a supernatural thing in some ways. Like, all we can do is try to eliminate these things from reaching our community or our kids, or so, you know, if we can eliminate DEI from this public school system, we haven't solved the whole problem, but at least for these students, they have a better chance of not being indoctrinated.
Well, I think, and it's not, and I'm
so
for it.
And,
I am for it at both end, but it's if people aren't saying, look, you need to focus on the roots, then you're just dealing with the weeds coming up every single time. And I think that, you know, Elon and Vivek and all this, they're knowledgeable. I'm not going to argue with their intelligence. However, they're not Christians. They're not going to understand it at the core of what they're dealing with is demonic, that it is a spiritual force that has to be dealt with at that level, and the church is the only entity on the planet capable of dealing with that.
Real quick, it makes me think of
because that the idea, because then it leads into more syncretism, and because that's their worldview. I would say is either secularism or syncretism, which is just opens the door for more of the demonic to come in. And I think this is where Christians can actually be a prophetic voice into that realm of, you know, Trump's transition team and Doge and all that other stuff, where they can say, hey, look, at the core of this, you're dealing with a worldview that's all of these poisonous fruits that are blooming, they have roots underneath the soil, and those need to be addressed too. And that's going to be a harder, longer work than, you know, shutting down DEI departments and firing people in these organizations, which needs to happen. I'm not arguing against that. Yeah, get rid of all the DEI stuff in these institutions. Yes and amen. Also,
the battle's not over.
Set the conditions to where, and it may be where it's not the government that's dealing with the root systems, let the churches unleash the churches.
And the roots are another way of describing presuppositions. Like,
yes, it's
with
the
grass,
it's the beliefs.
It's the underlying beliefs that you know, that cause the secondary things to grow. And one of my heroes in the faith is Francis Schaeffer, who was alive in the mid to late 20th century and was a Christian apologist and evangelist and pastor. And he was what made him distinct from so many others of his period was his ability to reach young people at the presuppositional level. And so he started this ministry in the Swiss Alps called L'Abri. And he had this little cottage up in the mountains. And this was in the 60s, predominantly in the 70s. And you had a lot of hippies and students that were, you know, getting high on LSD and chasing drugs and sex and all the things of the sexual revolution. And one of the things they would do is they'd go to Europe and travel, you know, just find themselves. And they would stumble upon L'Abri. And Francis and his wife, Edith, would welcome them into their home. They had kids. Some of these people were rough, but they had to do chores. They had responsibilities, but they could live there as long as they want. And every night he would lecture on a lot of these topics at a foundational level.
Right.
And so one of the things that Schaeffer would talk about, and this is for those listening that like, well, how do we help people see reality? He calls it taking the roof off of their worldview. And so what you do is, and he used this analogy of if he was on an hour flight sitting next to somebody who wasn't a believer, he would spend the first 50 minutes talking about their worldview and the last 10 minutes talking about the gospel. And what he would be doing is showing the inconsistencies in their worldview,
right,
on a very foundational level, that if this is true, then this can't be true, and helping them connect the dots that, oh, there's a lot of holes in my worldview. They might not be ready to take that next step of faith in Christ, but at least they start doubting their own worldview.
Right.
And they start seeing the pitfalls in their own worldview. And that's why these people pulling the strings are so concerned about social media and these independent voices, is they can't control the narrative. And so these independent voices are helping people start to question the groupthink and the indoctrination and the worldviews that they've adopted subconsciously.
There's a meta-narrative that they've been given.
Right, and they're starting to wake up. And they might not take the full step towards Christianity, but we've seen a lot of people do that, like a Russell Brand and even a Jordan Peterson. You see him taking steps away from where he was 10 years ago. And that's super encouraging, but it's through the presuppositional level. And as a Christian, if you don't, if you don't develop the life of the mind, if you're not thinking about ideas and philosophy and the things that are shaping your friends, your coworkers, your children, your grandchildren, then you're not going to know how to challenge the worldviews that are influencing them. You're just not going to be thinking on that level of depth. You're just going to hit surface things, and that's, to your point, you can mow some of the grass on the surface level, but you haven't destroyed it at the root. So that root is still in that person,
right?
And it's just going to grow back, and so there's a wealth of resources out there. And if we really believe that the Christian worldview is true, or as Schaeffer said, true truth, real reality, then we need to act like it.
Yeah.
We don't need to be afraid of these competing worldviews.
Well, you don't, and
we know there's inconsistencies.
It doesn't need to be a competition either, because I think it was Machen that said that false ideas are the greatest obstacle to belief in the gospel. Mm-hmm. Something along those lines.
Competition in what sense?
Because it's not a competition.
But what do you mean?
Meaning that if we see that, if we look at other worldviews as on almost equal footing with the biblical Christian worldview, I think our presupposition is wrong, because the biblical worldview is the truth about total realreality.
But you would say there's a competition in our culture.
There's a
for
competition
dominance.
in the culture, but you don't need to see it as you're competing with somebody with their worldviews. Like, we already know that ours is true. So what you're actually doing, if you don't take the position of, if you think that they're just equal and they're trying to competing and maybe they win and maybe Christianity is true, maybe Islam is true. If you take that type of mindset, then you're going the way that you're going to approach it, rather than seeing somebody as like, if they continue down the path of believing this worldview, it's going to destroy their lives.
So when you say competition, you mean like as if there's still a chance that the Christian worldview could lose.
Right. Yeah.
That this is a win or lose scenario where it's like the Christian worldview is won already. Yeah. It's real.
Since the foundations of the world.
Yeah, and Jesus was a real historical person. He was the Son of God. He died on the cross. It was a real thing. It changed human history. His resurrection
is the center of total reality.
And, and he said it's finished. The battle is won, even though the guerrilla warfare is still happening until he returns. So let's act like that. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so if you believe, act on this. Back to the presuppositions, like even as Christians, we have to constantly, I think,
that's faith.
Assess and analyze our own presupposition. Is like, am I actually? I say that he is risen is the center of total reality. Do I live like that? And then when I'm talking to other people who don't believe the way that I believe, am I actually still believing that and behaving in such a way? Meaning, am I articulating the biblical worldview in such a way that I'm like, if they don't get this, now it's on God. in them. It's between God and them. But if they don't get this, what they're currently believing is destructive for them, both eternally destructive and possibly destructive to their lives, then what I actually have to offer, the truth, could save their life.
Totally.
And I think if you take that perspective, it's humbling, because then it's not in your hands, it's in God's hands. But He's, don't kill the messenger. You're just the messenger of the truth. You're delivering the truth, albeit as imperfectly as we do at times, most of the time, but we're delivering that truth because it's the truth that sets them free. It's believing the truth and walking down that path. And, you start seeing people respond to just truth in general, like your Jordan Peterson. Like, there's a lot of hope there, because like they're responding to truth. They're on a path. Does it mean that they're Christians? No, it doesn't mean that they're Christians, but they're on a path, and I can celebrate that people are responding to truth.
You know what this makes me think of is when I was a kid. I'm the middle of three boys, and my dad was an athlete. He ran track at Texas Tech and threw the javelin, and so we were a sports family growing up. And in our backyard,
y'all had a javelin.
We had javelins in the garage. Yeah.
Oh man.
For some reason, we never got them out and
y'all were
launched them.
doing lawn darts before.
Hey, you want to play catch? Yeah, thankfully we took up baseball. But we had we lived over off of Ems Road in the Ridgemar, Westover Hills area, and we had a little square cement course in the backyard with a nice goal, and we'd play basketball all the time. And my dad, we'd play horse all the time, horse. And my dad always won when we were kids, but he would make us feel like we had a chance. But because he knew that, he was going to win, he was never threatened by us, making a run or we get to, he's at HORS and we're at H and we're thinking we're going to win, and he knows they're not. And so he's having fun. He's not nervous. He's not angry. He's not competitive to what you're saying. And that's kind of the same mentality as Christians, is like what makes us humble and enjoyable to debate with and to dialogue with, and a better evangelist is knowing and trusting in what we know to be true, which is that we win, and the Christian worldview is real reality, and it frees us up. Like, we're not threatened by the people opposing us. We're not scared. We're not nervous.
We're not even scared of not having an answer to a
we're not
question.
Scared of it. Yeah,
like the age of the earth, or prove to me that God exists, or these questions that sometimes you get hit with, particularly if you haven't never dealt with them before. Like, oh wow! But
there's a lot of things.
The beauty of those type of questions is that it actually fortifies your faith if you will go look for the answers as a Christian. That's what I loved about studying apologetics before worldview.
It's really more for the Christian than it is for evangelism.
Absolutely.
Evangelism is really just sharing your story, sharing the gospel and how it's changed your life, and then allowing the Holy Spirit to do its work in that person's life. Yes, some people get hung up on, evidence for this or that, and you can help.
That's where that's where defense for the faith,
and it's where you get them to cast doubt on their own views, which opens up doors to share the gospel. But at the end of the day, apologetics is really most effective at strengthening a Christian's faith, not winning someone over to Christ through just evidence. Most people don't become Christians because it's like, oh, that explained historically the resurrection. I see the evidence and now I believe. It's more of my eyes have been open. My ears have been open. I can see Jesus for who he really is. And I've heard the gospel explained, I believe,
Yeah.
So, that's interesting. So you've been doing, that's back-to-back weeks where you're talking about a lot of these social issues at these events in Fort Worth. That's kind of encouraging that these things are happening in Fort Worth.
I think Fort Worth could be an epicenter of, I would say, revival. I think what I would love to see is that Fort Worth becomes a hub or a magnet of Christian thought, serious Christian thought and action. Like, not just people that would come here to learn. We've got seminaries here locally and things like that. That the churches are strong, and that people are thinking, and that attracts thinking people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like we just all sit in classrooms all day long. It's like people are actually doing their.
Do you think
their
that fits
action.
the identity of Fort Worth? Like when I think of Fort Worth as a, taking on a personality, the city.
Mm-hmm.
It's the gateway to the West. It's
cowboy culture.
Cowboy culture, Billy the Kid and
Rugged individualism.
And the stockyards and rugged individualism. I think of doers. I think of people that are in some ways very humble, like they're not showy like Dallas. They're very just salt of the earth in many ways, but they're more action oriented. So I almost think that this kind of intellectual revival, this Fort Worth becoming kind of a center of thought for the Christian world, would be a new thing. But I could be wrong.
I think there's thinkers here. There's obviously Christian and non-Christian thinkers.
But as an identity, we're a town of...
We're an action-oriented town.
Yeah.
Yeah. We dig oil wells. We cattle.
Yeah.
We're builders.
Which I think with the combination of that in our DNA and then adding a more robust life of the mind, that's a great combo.
Yeah. I mean, if people can... Yeah, because if you go... you go to a lot of... large metropolitan areas, they have a intellectual elite class.
Yeah.
That doesn't go over well in Fort Worth. Like you have people that are obviously, wealthy and well-to-do and things like that. But what doesn't go over with the regular Fort Worth people is people that are flashy.
Yeah.
Like that will get you,
it's so true.
Like you go to Dallas, that's what it's all, the flashier, like
you literally, when I drive to Dallas, I can visibly see a change in the
way that people drive,
and the way they drive, the cars they drive, the building, everything is showier.
Yeah,
the skyline
all
is
style,
showier.
No soul. That's why life's too short to live in Dallas. We live in Fort Worth.
But it is interesting how just 30 minutes away, it takes on a whole different
Culturally
identity.
different. You're dealing with a New York, Boston, just any other metropolitan. That's why I think when you say the things you need to guard in Fort Worth, with all the problems that a city like Fort Worth has, the things that you need to guard is part of that identity is actually good.
Yeah,
it's like our
humility,
our ethos of being doers. And yes, we have problems and things like that, but I think that action-oriented, can-do spirit, kind of hold my beer, watch me, type of is a good attitude to have. Now it can lead you to some bad places, but that's where.
And people are shocked that it's the 12th largest city in the country.
Yeah.
Because we don't act like it. We still have that small town.
We fight that mentality, which I think is a healthy thing. But if we don't watch it, we will turn into the next, city. But I think that goes back to cultural renewal, like holding on to the things that are good in the city, and then introducing things that need to be introduced. And that's why I think it's with the ways that seminaries and some of the schools have gone, it's like Fort Worth is ripe for new institutions to be created and built where people are thinking, because we're already doing, just inform that action a little bit more.
So new institutions, not necessarily recovering institutions?
You can recover institutions as well, but I think, I talked to a pastor friend of mine at lunch today, and we're just talking about, seminaries, how it'd be hard to take a big seminary and reform it because it's been around for so long and all those things. It's like, well, what if you
turning a ship around? It takes
like an aircraft carrier.
Time,
like versus if you started a seminary with 20 or 30 men and say, we're going to train you up to be pastors, not managers, not marketing people. We're going to train you up to be pastors, because you're going to actually, while you're being trained up, you're going to be working in churches under pastors who've been in the pastorate for at least 20 years minimum with these men.
What a lot of churches have tried to do is partner with seminaries, allowing seminaries to give the student or the intern or the resident, whatever, certain skill sets that like teaching Greek and Hebrew, you got to have people that are qualified to do that. So maybe you offload that for seminary, but then when it comes to a lot of the other stuff, the church takes charge of that. And what oftentimes what used to happen, I was a pastor in Natchitoches, Louisiana, halfway between Shreveport and Alexandria, and was working for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and was a college pastor at First Baptist Natchitoches. And so I was in the church world and in the parachurch world, and I increasingly realized that God was pushing me towards the church world and developing my theology, and I really enjoyed the academic side. And so the way up to this point it's been done was, you're called to go to seminary, and then your church waves you goodbye and they never see you again. I've never been back to that church since I moved to Fort Worth in 2009. And so the church identifies you as someone called to the ministry, and then they send you away never to be seen again. That makes no sense.
That's not the way that it originally would go, because the pastor that I was having lunch with was the way that it used to go, was that a young man, had an interest in the ministry. The pastor would acknowledge
like an apprentice
and bring him before the congregation and say, this young man feels like he's called to ministry. We're going to pray for him. We're going to support him, blah, 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 blah. And then put him in the pulpit, like within a couple of weeks.
But he still eventually went off to seminary.
And would train him up in that church.
Yeah, but that can only happen if there's a seminary.
Right. But what I'm saying is that I think the seminary, the way that it's set up now, is what are needed are theologically, that you need to have the seminary training, but you have to have the practical.
No, I agree.
In the trenches, working with people, because what him and I were talking about was that you have people with seminary degrees that got it all online, and they're woefully unprepared to deal with people.
So I was about to mention that it's like some churches, instead of sending that person away to another city to go to seminary, they just pay for them to enroll in an online degree program. But then there's a lot of negatives to that.
Yeah. Well, I think I wouldn't do. I think what needs to happen is churches. If you have a city like Fort Worth, you have enough solid churches with men with solid. It's not the degree. I mean, a lot of the trajectory of a lot of people in their, say, 25 and younger are towards technical vocational degrees, to where they want to fix things, plumbers, electricians, things like that. That the idea is that there may be enough knowledge base where you're giving them an ability. You're training them in an ability to be a pastor, not just to have a degree and then figure out what comes next, because the seminaries are full of people that wash out of ministry. And that may be a good thing. It's not a knock against seminaries, but the way that a lot of them are set up now, they're failing. They're failing because the pastors are coming in, and there's not enough new pastors being pastors, not people with ministry and all these other degrees that they offer. Pastors, not enough to replace the current ones. Mm-hmm. There's not enough pastors, not even close.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That are retiring. So the idea is like provide the training. It's like the Colson thing. The Colson Fellows program is a master's level type of program, but you're not getting a degree. Like, people that enter the program aren't entering it so they can get a little piece of paper that says I'm a Colson Fellow. They're entering it to gain the experience to be able to minister in such a way and understand the world in such a way to do whatever God calls them to do.
I agree.
I think that's like with theological methods and things that Forge Room does, is like, we'll just train people. And
but you don't want to water it down, is all I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's not about the degree.
No, it's not watering it down. It's actually amping it up and making it what you're learning in seminary. You're seeing how it intersects with someone's life in a congregation in real time. to where it's not just all practical theology. You're also dealing with thinkers. You have to tie
it's kind of like
together.
the homeschool co-ops, a little bit of, okay, so-and-so is great in this subject, and so they're going to come in and teach our students on this subject, and so. It's like taking the resources you have, and we've got a friend, a pastor friend of ours that, got his PhD in Old Testament and knows Hebrew and
right.
Lives locally. Bring him in to teach.
Exactly.
So as long as it goes back to the meritocracy. Like, there are certain things you have to be able to do to be a pastor, and we don't want to lower the bar out of convenience.
Yeah,
and I know that's not what you're saying, but you just got to make sure that
you got to define what you mean by a pastor that's been trained in that way.
And
you know what I'm saying? That has a seminary training, because you have pastors that I'm a pastor and I don't have seminary training.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is there's certain, when you think about a curriculum, to train somebody, and you love the military stuff. So when you think about a program in the military to prepare them for this particular, group that they're going into, they've identified certain skill sets that you have to have.
You have to have them. And
so all I'm saying is that we have to stay committed to the skill sets that you have to be a good preacher, pastor, shepherd, and if we can provide those opportunities to be trained in those areas right here locally, praise God.
Yeah.
But if we can't, then we got to get creative as to how we
that's
go
the
find that.
The whole thing is that you make it. I don't think it has to cost that much, and I think it can be done locally and organically, where men that want to be pastors and preachers, and this is in church context, not working up a career ladder. This is guys that are like, I think I'm called to be a pastor at a church, and these men could end up being, elder pastors. But it's setting up the conditions where they can come into a program, call it a hybrid seminary type of deal, to where it's very serious. It's just as rigorous, but it's a whole different experience, because it's not just, hey, we're going to put you over at ABC Church and you're going to work under this department. It's like, no, you're going to go, sit under a pastor at this that matches your denomination, and
like an apprentice.
You're going to be his
follow
apprentice,
his lead,
and you're going to everything that he's doing. You're going to be watching
him,
and learning, and we're going to be providing the theological, and we're also going to provide worldview training. We're also going to get you into the trenches and some other areas in the community, so that you're in constant project immersion mode, where it's not just sitting in front of a computer and learning some information that you may or may not use later on. Mm-hmm. And obviously you'll have some technology side to this, because it's a useful tool, but the idea is get them ready for war. Don't get them ready to sit in an office all day long. Because being a pastor is warfare.
And you're not training them to be a manager.
No.
You're training them to be a pastor.
You're a pastor. And I think you can cut a lot of the busy work, downtime, cut the fat, and actually help a man at least get on that trajectory, because then comes years of experience. He's going to have to be an apprentice for a few years before. He's not going to just go plant a church right out of the program. You're going to... but this is a big city. There's plenty of opportunities.
There's a good book called The Mentoring Church by Phil Newton. I think he's his first name, Phil. Really good. It just shows, I think, maybe 3 or 4 different ways that churches are trying to do this. And I think there's some good models out there. I think Nine Marks does a really good job.
One,
but it's rigorous, and they don't cut corners, and I think that's why they produce such good results.
Well, I think but back to the institutions, you're talking about what can you do in a city. It's like, well, you set up a seminary that's easy to, talking about equal opportunity, that's easy to access it. Mm-hmm. Now, once you get in, it gets very hard, but anybody can access it. It's not expensive. It's something like, if you're committed, then you can get in. The bar as far as an obstacle of getting in is
equal opportunity, but can you get through the program?
There's no equity in outcomes here. It's like you're going to have this is kind of like Bud's training whatever.
I was about to say one of the special operation.
You could wash out of it, but that's
you could
okay.
but you could just roll in as an 18-year-old kid, and if you can get through, you get through. But you're probably not going to get through. But there's no. The only limit is your ability to
handle the rigor.
Handle the rigor. It's not a credential thing that kept you from doing it.
And it's not tests and tests and tests. You'll be tested, but the tests are going to be everything that we do is it would be geared toward that interaction with an individual dealing with a problem, because that's what pastoring is. You're dealing with people.
Yeah.
And as an introvert, I kind of get my head around that, because when I first started as a local outreach pastor, I thought I was really just dealing with systems and building teams, and I didn't realize that.
Well, it took me about 4 years to convince you were a pastor. Yeah. You and Ted. So yeah,
y'all won. I'll give you that much. But yeah, good conversation. We're
next time I want to share with you I had a hunting failure.
Oh, a hunting failure.
Yeah, that I'll share with you.
Yeah.
And in fact, I still have poison oak. That's why I've been scratching during this episode, is because I have poison oak on my back, because I was walking through this thick stuff that apparently poison oak everywhere, and so it was falling down my shirt because I was hitting all these branches, and found that out the next day. Yeah, I felt like a loser after that, but no, I'll share that next time. But
good stuff.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me again.
Yeah,
this was fun.
Awesome, man. Appreciate you.
All right,
see ya.